What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Corey Austin MMA Theorem. I wanted to really quickly touch on this Jaxxon podcast, okay? Rampage Jackson is on it, and another guy named Bear. I don't really watch this podcast. They had a podcast recently where they invited on Bryce Mitchell. Unless you've been living up under a rock, Bryce Mitchell had a very controversial few moments there a week or two ago when he said some words about a certain dictator that literally attempted to wipe out an entire race. Okay? It's a buzzword. I don't want to get my video dropped, demonetized, deleted, anything like that. So I'm not even going to say the word, but you know what I'm talking about. You know what the conversation was, and you know what Bryce said about this person, okay? So we won't go over that, but I did want to discuss, this is going to be a change of pace. Instead of talking shit about Bryce Mitchell, about what he originally said, I kind of want to put on blast this Jaxxon podcast for why did you have him on in the first place, okay? So this is actually, like I said, been yanked down at this point, but I saw another person that had it up, and I guess they clipped it before it was taken down, and there's some things about it where I'm like, why did you have him on the podcast if this is the way that you were going to interact with him? Okay, so without further ado, let's watch a little bit of the podcast. Let's watch the first couple of minutes of it, and it kind of left me confused and bewildered, to be honest, and I just want to see what you guys thought about it as well. So let's start right here.
Severity of it. I wish I didn't have to talk about it at all, but I feel like the severity of it, being this is the first time I've shown my face since I said it, I do want to talk about it. First things first, I said word for word, I do not support, I am not a Nazi. I said it word for word. You can go back and watch it, and
people just clipped up some of the stuff.
I said was a good guy, and then I said, after that, I said before he committed all the atrocities. But they didn't play the whole podcast. Okay, so I did a good guy, but I was saying before.
We're not even going to give you a platform to explain yourself on that. I personally just feel with the things that he did and the millions of people that died, there's no justification pre or post. Whatever you did say, ain't nobody a good guy. And we as people, and me as a fan of MMA, right? As a fighter, I watch all your fights, right? You bring the Bible in the cage. You did some amazing things before that podcast. Rampage is an icon to me. I look up to Rampage.
So, I mean, right there, obviously Bryce immediately goes into trying to defend himself, and he, makes the statement right out of the gate. Well, they clipped it. They didn't put the whole podcast in there. I was saying that he was a good guy before he started doing XYZ and committed all of the atrocities that he did. And then apparently that part was left out, and they only clipped the part where he was saying was a good guy. Talking about a person that was a dictator and responsible for the deaths of 6 million of one ethnicity of people. That's what he's been given credit for, not to mention literally the cause for World War II. You're not talking about good guy, bad guy anymore, okay? You're talking about a completely different level of evil, okay? Complete, total, utter disregard for not only human life, but total, complete, and utter abuse of authority. I mean, all of the rest of it. This isn't the guy on the street that runs out on his wife and cheats on her every weekend, and you have a friend that tells you about it, and they see him out at the club and he's with other women. He's a bad guy, okay? This dictator, I don't even think you can really put him in the same classification. And also, too, just by Bryce saying that, well, I was talking about before. If this person was capable of ever potentially doing all of the atrocious things that he did, then I would have to say, and I would have to lean on the side of, no, he was a bad guy already. Okay? I mean, his being a bad guy didn't start when he first began the genocide of a whole race of people, right? Started before that. Because obviously his frame of thinking and his way of looking at life and just the heads that he stepped on without regard to get to the position of power that he was in, that should tell you everything you need to know about whether he is a good guy in his heart and in his mind already, right? So, poor argument, good guy, bad guy, not necessarily indicative of the bad things that you do or the poor choices that you make. It's not necessarily indicative of actions, okay? You have bad people, believe it or not, sometimes make good choices to do good things. Likewise, good people can sometimes make bad choices and do stupid things or mean things that hurt other people. I'm a good guy, but I've still done things in the past before to hurt not only myself, but my wife. So good guy, bad guy is not chalked up only to actions. Let's listen to the next part of it.
Did all the
Yeah, but
atrocities.
brother, you don't know him, right? You don't know the severity of what he did to the world. Obviously, I could tell you don't know for you to be able to even relaxedly say that word, that he was a good guy. And I'm not even going to give him the benefit of saying his name, but those extremist ideologies, the things he did to, millions of people are some of the most disgusting, most evil things the world ever seen. Now, we're not going to give you a platform today to talk about anything that even remotely supports that.
No,
we're not going to give you a platform
I don't want
to justify what you said. And matter of fact, and me and Rampage talked about this.
And my question would be for the Jaxxon podcast. Okay, so you don't want him, you're not even going to give him a platform to explain himself, but you had to have known that this is the first time Bryce Mitchell has been seen on camera and anyone has heard him speak since all of this happened and since all of this went down, right? We all love Bryce Mitchell as a fighter. That's what most of us know him for. But right now, given the current climate of what's going on around Bryce Mitchell, no one gives a shit about his last fight against Kron Gracie. No offense. No one even gives a shit about his fight before that when he got flat earthed by Josh Emmett. No one even cares about that at this point, right? Anything. If you say the name Bryce Mitchell right now to an MMA fan, some people don't even have to be MMA fans. That's how notorious this was. And that's how infamous this has become, that he said what he said, right? You got people who don't even watch MMA know Bryce Mitchell's name now because he's the guy that said was a good guy, okay? So from the Jaxxon podcast perspective, you already know that this is a pink elephant that's just going to be floating all around the room when you start to do this podcast, yet you still agree to do the podcast knowing what is on everybody's mind and what is on everybody's lips, and knowing what all of your viewership and listeners are going to be expecting to hear, to see. Do you really think that the viewers of Jaxxon Podcast are going to be watching and expecting to hear about who Bryce Mitchell's fighting next? Or hear more about his faith, or, hear about how he recently bought a house and he's a farmer and you think that's really? Don't get me wrong, Bryce Mitchell's a very interesting character, and he is because he has quite a few eccentricities, I guess, that people are attracted to. And fair enough, yeah. But what he said recently completely and absolutely overshadows any of the unique things that people love about, or came to love about Bryce Mitchell, at least for the time being, at least temporarily. I'm not saying that at some point in the future, it's just like anything else. People kind of forget about it. You kind of live it down with time a little bit, and there will be a time where it'll be kind of a quiet whisper. Oh, you remember that's the guy that said blah, 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 blah back in 2025. It'll be that sort of thing. But for right now, you had to know that if you have him on the podcast, it's going to be something that Bryce Mitchell is going to feel the need to talk about, but also your listeners and your viewership are going to be expecting and anticipating the topic to come up. In fact, I would say the Jaxxon podcast viewership probably went up significantly for that particular podcast. Is it because Bryce Mitchell is just this grossly popular fighter? I mean, he's pretty well known, but nah. It's because everybody knows what he said, and a lot of people were probably tuning in to watch to see not only what his explanation for the stupid shit he said was going to be, but also the host, Rampage and Bear. What were they going to say? What was their response going to be? You know, were they going to give him shit about it? Were they going to give him a complete verbal beatdown? Or were they just going to kind of wash their hands of it? You know, say, oh, you know, I understood that people kind of took it out of context. No big deal. We don't have to keep harping on that. Let's move on to talking about other shit, like who you're fighting next. You had to know where this was headed. You had to know where this was going. You had to know where people were expecting it to go. You had to know where people who were tuned in listening to that particular podcast, your viewers, and a lot of people who probably previously weren't your viewers, are tuning in just to watch and see what this interaction with Bryce Mitchell is going to be, because this is the first one we've seen of him. Since this shit went down, since this shit happened, right? People want to know. And then you go through with the podcast, you have him on there, only to then put brakes on as soon as he says something about it, as soon as he starts to talk about it, as soon as he starts to try to explain himself. I don't understand, like, why did you have him on then? You know, Rampage, I think, was kind of looking at it from a perspective of, this dumbass, you know, his dumb ass, he didn't realize what he was getting himself into.
I got a full-time Jewish chef, and Rampage, the only reason why he was accepting of even doing this podcast, you know, we already had pre-booked you before that show, and we've been trying to get you on for about a year, right? Mm-hmm. And so Rampage said, I want to be able to see him face to face and explain to him the severity of what he did. Right. So at least if you didn't, you do understand what you did damages people's relationships with their family over arguments, damages society, wasting time on things they shouldn't be talking about. We should be coming together as a world, but we should never justify the persecution and the extremism that we've seen in the past from that man or any sort of that nature, right? So,
right, I totally agree, brother. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to say I don't support.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Nazi. And I said that, and I'm glad that you got to let me repeat that. Before he did all of that stuff is what I was talking about, guys.
Yeah, we're not even.
We understand. Listen,
I'm not denying anybody's suffering, bro. Like,
we
I'm
understand
literally
that.
not denying anybody's suffering.
We understand.
But you do know millions of people, over 5 million people died because of him.
A lot of people.
One of the deadliest wars of all time, World War II. Probably over 50 million people. Population died.
War,
yeah. So you are aware that even trying to justify that, you got to move past that, brother. Right?
No. Listen,
you can't even.
Listen, we understand. We understand it's your first podcast and stuff like that, and what you got to understand about this business right here. You got to be careful what you say, because people will take it out of context and they will clip it. You know,
that's what I believe happened, but you know, I shouldn't have said it in the first place.
Yeah, you shouldn't have said it.
You keep saying, "If I believe in God," let me tell you, brother, that's about as backward of a statement as you can make. There ain't no if. I'm telling you right now that I know that Jesus Christ is God, the Son of God. There ain't no if, there ain't no and there ain't no buts. I'm telling you, I know Jesus Christ. I have called on his name, and he has casted demons from my life. I have seen it, and I know. There's no debate there. I know Jesus Christ is Lord. And then from that,
everything. And from that, I would hope that you would know that the most important thing then
is bringing people together.
And
yes,
at the same time, your job is not to pass judgment.
Right. And
to any circumstance or any community.
Right. And,
right.
And
didn't Jesus heal the people who threw stones at him? Didn't Jesus forgive the people who crucified him?
Absolutely. absolutely, yeah. And I
So if
don't
you have a
hate.
platform, you have to understand, because my job here today, because I personally was on the fence about doing the podcast. As a fighter, you're phenomenal.
Basically, that was a shitstorm that everybody involved in that Jaxxon podcast should have sat down prior and had a good understanding about what are the guidelines here. What are the ground rules that we are going to set down right here about what he said, addressing what Bryce said? Are we just going to completely, just talk around it and just freak and completely ignore the big fat elephant in the room? Or are we going to take a hard stance on it and tell him he's a fucking shit person for ever saying that, and we hate his guts and we hope that it ruins his career? And, you get what I'm saying? We kind of just going to go somewhere in between and be like, look, we feel so strongly about that bullshit that you said, we literally are not even going to allow you to discuss it. And if you're going to do that, and if you're going to take that sort of hard stance, which I'm not busting on them for taking that stance. You saw how much trouble Bryce got in for saying what he said, right? We live in a free speech society, but obviously there are some exceptions to that when it comes to certain things and certain topics. Are we going to address it because obviously it's a big-ass pink elephant in the room? But then quickly put a stop to it and say, but we're not going to talk about that because we're not even going to give any airtime and any platform to talking about that. I don't know. And they deleted the podcast. They've since deleted the podcast. I've done videos before that, not very often, but I've done videos before that I ended up, deleting. But mainly for me, it's when I see that there's some sort of huge mistake that I made or something like that, like an editing sort of mistake, and I'll be like, damn it, I'll delete it and fix it and repost it. But this isn't an editing mistake. This is a clear, hard stance on a very polarizing, moral topic, if you will, right? Like, that's a big F up to not get right before you start the podcast. How did you not get that right? Ask him the question, what the fuck's wrong with you? And then just let him go. You had to know that he wasn't going to turn around again and say that was a good guy, right? So I think it's one of those things, like, if you're going to start it by saying, hey, what the fuck is wrong with you, then let the guy talk. Let the guy explain it. Let him explain it. There's ways that you can record something and it not be live at that exact given moment. You can do that on YouTube. Even if they were actually going live on the YouTube app, there's ways that you can record it. It's live, but it's not posted until you say it's posted. So someone had to record that whole thing, purposely press the button to make it live, as in public, as in everybody can see it, and then turn around later and take the thing down, I guess, when they started getting a bunch of blowback from it. I don't know, man. That thing was done all wrong. That's a big fuck up to not get right before, making it public. You understand? So anyway, I've had some thoughts on that because I heard that he had done this Jaxxon podcast. Obviously, I was very curious to see what was said about it, what his response was, early on, coming back after this travesty of these horrible things that he said. But then I learned that it got deleted and they got rid of it. But then I learned, and I wasn't surprised to learn, that it was still floating around on the internet out there somewhere. So I was able to see what it was, what was said, and this and that. And I just thought that, bro, just let him go. Tell him not to say the word. The guy, who the guy is, tell him not to say that. But then let him explain. Even if it's bullshit, even if you don't agree with it, and even if you still think it was a really stupid thing to say, which it was. But even if you feel that way, let him let him say what he had to say, and don't cut him off. Don't ask him, well, what the fuck is wrong with you? And then when he starts trying to explain it, oh, we're not going to talk about that. And we're not even going to give you a platform to explain yourself either. Well, then 2 questions. 1, why the hell am I on here? And 2, why is one of the first things that Rampage said to me is, what the fuck is wrong with you? I don't know. Just weird. Anyway, what do you guys think? Should they have brought him on? Should they have not brought him on? Should they have brought him on and let him actually explain himself? I mean, what should they have done here? I'm curious to know what you guys think. All right. Like the video if you would, subscribe to the channel. And of course, comment down below. I will see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.